Good evening. It's time for the visit with the person of high strangeness. As some of you know, I myself am a intuitive consultant, and what that means is that I get lots of phone calls from some of the friends that need advice in relationships, in earth changes, and things like that. And the other thing that people ask about is how can we use intuitiveness to be more prosperous and use for other purposes. Now, a few weeks ago, we had a guest by the name of Donna Sibo, and actually, we talked about storytelling and how her book came about, and we talked about children again. But on the flip side of that, Ms. Donna Sibo is also an expert on intuitiveness and things like that. So I'm going to change my format a little bit today. And I thought, so instead of calling me all the time, you might want a second opinion. And therefore, we're going to ask her today how she views that and some of the advice that she can give you. And thank you for all the calls, by the way. And I'm glad that you did like the storytelling show. So without any further delay, I'm going to say hello to my guest, my repeat guest, Donna Sibo. How are you?
I'm just delighted to be here. Just delighted to be here.
It's wonderful to have you back.
Thank you.
And like I was telling the friends, instead of calling me, I let him get a second opinion today, so I'm going to sort of give you a free hand.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, how you want to do that?
Well, you know, we had as the topic, intuition, a tool for prosperity and success. And you've been involved in the area of metaphysics for years, and I've been involved with it for years myself, for over 30. And I travel right now all over the country doing this very program. And one of the things that I feel that it's so important for people to understand is that intuition is a very normal, natural talent. But like any talent, it has to be disciplined, it has to be trained, and you have to learn how to incorporate it into your own life. So part of what my delight is to enable people, to empower people, to understand that intuition, when you use it along with education, good sense, and action, it can serve as a marvelous tool. A very good tool to help you in your life, to make you able to recognize and appreciate opportunity when it comes into your experience, and also to be willing to be open to explore it.
Exactly.
To be willing to develop it in yourself.
Yeah, I did a show with Barbara McGuire and her sister, and between the three of us and her brother that we made reference to, we had combined 170 years in experience. So take heed.
Yes, it's wonderful. It really, really is. Yeah. I come in contact with people from all walks of life. And frequently, when someone finds out, which I'm sure you've experienced, when someone finds out that you're a psychic, they automatically put you in a particular category.
Yes, they do.
And I've had quite a few people that I've met over the years that when they've heard me on the air, because I do broadcasts throughout the country, when they've heard me on the air, they're not really quite sure what to expect if they're going to meet me in person. But one of the things that I get such a kick out of is that one, they say, gee, I never knew you were so short.
You was a real person.
And two, that you're not one of these far-out kooky individuals, you know, that they come in contact with. And I really think it's a sad thing that there has been such a malignment of the intuitive area in life and how important it is. I was reading a very popular book. It was Mutant Down Under, that was about the Aborigine.
One of our favorites.
Yes,
yeah, Marlo Morgan.
Yes, and Marlo Morgan, I've had the opportunity of meeting her a couple of times.
So have I.
And she is just a very down-to-earth person.
Isn't she?
Just a marvelous lady. And one of the greatest experiences, I believe, that she took away from this interaction with the Aborigine is that if we are willing to develop our senses, if we're willing to take that step and explore our own intuition and work with it so that it is something we use as a tool, then we'll find we'll know when we're in the right place with the right people. We'll know what we need to do for ourselves. We're not going to feel so isolated and alone.
Yeah, except in Marlo's case, that's not what she had in mind when she had the meeting
Right.
with him, and she just found herself in that situation.
Right. They were ready for her.
For her, yeah, she
But
thought
she
she was
was
going
no
to get
way.
a plaque.
Oh, I
yeah.
just loved the part where her
Yeah.
makeup was running down her face, and
was.
she's, you know, she said they took all of her clothes and they burned them.
That's
you know.
right. And they
And,
hadn't-
and it's so funny because she goes, "Oops, now I don't have anything to go back with."
And she also says that they had never met a person that changed fragrance. From perfume to sweat to desperation, yeah. Just
Yeah.
the name of that book is Mutant Message Down Under, and she has out a new one, and I can't recall the name of that one.
Yes, she does.
Yeah.
But here we have a prime example of someone who had an opportunity to go into a culture firsthand and experience the telepathic aspect and experience so many things. One of my joys is that in my work, I've met so many people that have had various experiences.
Yeah.
And they have frequently not known what to do with it. And let me give you an example. And there was a Native American up in Alaska that lived in a certain village, and she came to me for a private consultation. And this was a young woman. This wasn't someone that was in their 50s or 60s. This was a young gal in her late 20s. And she was very concerned. She thought she was losing her mind.
Exactly.
And I asked her what her experiences were. And when she is in a business meeting or interacting with persons that are going to have a very strong impact on her life in one way or another, she will get animal images superimposed over her face. And so I was asking her what was going on, and she would tell me. So I said, "Do you understand what's happening to you?" She said, "No, I don't." And I said, "All right, now you tell me one of the experiences, who was the person?" And she said, "Well, there was this one man, we were in a business meeting, and he had a face of a wild pig." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And then she said, "Then I had another meeting with someone else who was, as I was talking with him about a certain aspect of business, there was this face of a wild dog that came over his." Now, I asked her, being of the Alaskan background,
Yeah.
what do these symbols mean to you? You know, what do the animals mean to you? And she said, "Well, a wild pig is one that's very hard to tame and very difficult to catch and can be, you know, something that's a slippery type of critter." And then she said, with the person who had the face of the wild dog, a wild dog you will not trust. You can't trust this wild dog. So I said, "All right, now think about the people that you were sitting with. What does this mean?" And so then she told me that when she was thinking about it, she said, "My goodness, the fellow that was the one that had the face of the wild pig, he was very shrewd, and pigs are known to be very intelligent animals." So, but she said he was very slippery. I couldn't get him down. The one that had the face of the wild dog that came across, he was totally unstable. She couldn't depend on anything really with this person. And I said, "All right, now think about what you're describing relative to the individual conditions." So she did, and she said, "Oh my goodness, it makes sense." I said,
Yeah.
"Yes." Now, one of the things that I asked her was, did she have anyone from her village and could discuss this kind of experience with? She said, and I said, "Well, I really would like to see you try to find someone that is a shaman or has an understanding of that, because what that will do, that'll put you into connection with learning how to read your own mind language."
Yeah.
And that's something that very frequently people don't understand. It's not that they don't want to, but they don't have anybody that can really tell them. When you're developing and you want to use intuition as a tool, you need to, first of all, understand that it is normal and natural and accept it. Realize that it's not just for special people, it's for everybody. But that it may demonstrate through you in a very unique way.
Yeah. Now, what I like to say here, there is a book, it's called Animal Speak by Ted Andrews.
Oh, yes, that's wonderful.
And every household should have one of those. So when you do see or perceive animals, or they cross your path for that day, be sure you look that up until you're so familiar that you automatically interpret what it's trying to tell you. And after the show, I'm going to give you, I can give you the number of a shaman in that area, so
Oh,
you can
wonderful.
refer your people there.
Yes, I'd be glad to do that. I'd be glad to do that. It's really so interesting to see how people's minds work differently. But in the area of working intuitively, one of the biggest things that I have found is that frequently people that work in this arena of expertise have a difficulty dealing with prosperity and with success. And that is why I have combined a program where you deal with intuition as a tool for prosperity and success. Because there's nothing in this world that says you're supposed to be suffering and down and out and miserable in life, and there's nothing out there in the universe that says that that's what you've got to go through. But life is an experience, a living experience. So when you become in tune with your intuition, then you're not as likely, I think, to make those faux pas that frequently we make in life because we feel like floundering fish.
Yeah. Before we get to the prosperity part here, I do know that you travel pretty much the world, and have you found that you are more normal or accepted in other countries?
It depends on the people.
On the people.
And what I've found is that people in general are pretty much the same. It is how you express yourself that makes the difference. If you try to use terms that are very, what do I want to say, sort of airhead level,
Right, yeah.
where you're using something in the way of a terminology that just doesn't even relate to everyday life, then I think you can have problems. I think there is still today, for all of our education and our knowledge that's available, we've got tens of thousands of books now, where when I started out in the work, is when you started out, there was very little published, very little. But today there is so much there, and you can go and pick a topic. You can, if you want to know about telepathy or clairvoyance, anything like this, now you have a chance where you can go and read about it, and you can ask questions. There's people around, and in different parts of the world, in different cultures, it's fun because it is very acceptable.
Exactly. In most cultures, we are part of society. And in America, some kind of way we're a little behind them. We want to make it a religious thing, which it's not.
No, it has nothing to do with religion. Absolutely none.
But America is getting better in that area. Would you agree?
I think that the education of a lot of people, and I credit, again, books. The previous show we talked about books quite a bit, but my goodness, that's been my major source of knowledge and inspiration. I absolutely love to read. And it's always good to know about what other people are doing, how they are expressing themselves and communicating. And now, development of intuition for the business person and for the police officer, for any profession, and in the medical profession, I think it is absolutely wonderful. No matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, you can, again, be a maid in a hotel. It doesn't make any difference.
That's right.
What your profession is doesn't count. It doesn't count at all. It's how willing are you to explore this so that it works for you. A good example of intuition and how it can affect your life professionally. I've been going up to Alaska for over 20 years. And it came about because of a client that I had known for a few years. I mean, I hardly saw this person. And so I get a call this one October, and it was in September, excuse me. She said, "Donna, what would it take for you to come into where I am?" And I said, "Well, if you will, get me on the top radio station." Well, at that time, it was just really, really backwoods compared. This is up in Alaska, in Anchorage, compared to what it is today. So I said, "Well, get me on a show." I didn't expect to hear anything. I mean, nobody's going to, You get a call like that. Yes, maybe somebody's going to follow through. Well, she called me back.
Mm-hmm.
And I had something booked for the month of October, and she said, well, I've already got you booked on a show up here on October the 8th.
Yeah, that's right.
And I said, whoops, well, I guess I am going to be going. And it was a sense of adventure, and I went up. Well, what amazed me was over 100 people turned out at this woman's home to meet me before I went on the broadcast.
Yeah.
And the openness and the excitement just absolutely amazed me.
It's wonderful. I go to the Adams Center in Anchorage.
Absolutely amazed me.
And we do have, you know, we are on Channel 44 in Anchorage on Thursday nights at, I believe it's 11 or 11:30, I'm not really sure. And the Metro Bookstore is a wonderful outlet for people to come and bump into us. Yeah. Yeah. So their learning is wonderful.
Oh, I mean, it's Alaska is just phenomenal. And the 20 years I've been going up there, it's incredible. It's like my second home. But my point was, it was even at that time, almost 20 years ago, the attitude of people was that of curiosity.
Yeah.
And they would tell me stories about things that happened with them, you know, bush pilots, the experiences that they have, how they developed their intuitive skills. Business people, judges that I talked with, who have used it in dealing with, you know, the different people that come before them. So no matter who you are, no matter what kind of work you're in, it is an area to explore. Now, one thing I have learned, and it's not a discriminating factor purposefully, but women typically are more intuitive than men. And I think it's because Mother Nature
That's right.
has equipped us with this, because the male had more of the physical attributes. And when I would talk to people up in Alaska, the natives up there, there was a woman who had a PhD in business that I met. And she came from a particular village, and she said to me that she was very sad that her mother had not taught her the telepathic skills that they used in the village. Because when the men would go out hunting, the women would teach the young girls so that they could do what the mothers and grandmothers and aunties did, and that was telepathically keep in touch with the people
with the men,
that were out there, the men that were out hunting, because if they became injured, then telepathically they'd get the information, and then they could go to the shaman, and then they'd send a rescue team out. So she said that was something that for her was a very sad situation, because she said, here I am with a PhD, and when I was growing up, my mother said, well, we're being taken over by white men, and so consequently what I want you to do is to become a part of their world so that you can fit in their world, which is fine, but she would not teach her any of the mental skills.
Yeah, but you know, I can sort of identify with that, being from a country where I come from, that was normal, you know. And then when I came to America, I wanted to fit in, and it was important, and I learned the American ways. And then, so my children, you know, I sort of missed them. And then I figured that that was the wrong thing to do. So now my grandchildren, they get a double dose of telepathy and everything else there is. And so it is just that I think it's job of people like you and I to impress on the friends that regardless of where you're from, don't skip one generation, because every little bit is valuable.
Well, what I love about today, when you see the programs like Star Trek, The Voyager, and you have all of these different shows, there's always that aspect that they're demonstrating with intuition.
That's right.
And it is intriguing to see how culturally we are not going to the positioning of, well, it's like gypsies. I'll never forget one program I did at one convention center, and it was during the program I made the comment that the image of the gypsies, someone that really looks wild and crazy and is unethical, and the people just don't convey an image at all of professionalism. So one of the members of the audience after the talk said, "I want you to know I'm a gypsy, and I don't fit that." And I said,
Yeah.
this is good, and I appreciate that comment from you. I wasn't maligning gypsies. It is the connotation that goes with anything that's of the psychic area. And regrettably, there's still a large grouping of people that will make a statement, well, anything that has to do with psychic work is bad work. Yet, you'll have that same person say, according to whatever their religious background is, etc., whatever zone they're comfortable in, they'll say, but I meditate and I'll get answers. And I'll say, well, you're not any different. Very same thing. And then it sort of takes them aback because, again, they have this false image in their mind about what it is.
Yeah, now here we have just added Greenville, Illinois to our little, I don't have an air date at this time, but to the group of networkers that are showing this show. And I've told some of my Greenville stories in my book and also on the shows. When I first came to Greenville, they wanted to arrest me because they thought I was a gypsy because I had the RV and I had dark hair and things like that. And I have seen that little town grow in 4 years, that now, this last time I came, it is wonderful how the young people, they have opened up. With persistence, I'm now a welcomed friend that stays on the good part of town. And so in a roundabout way, I think with persistence, we can change the consciousness of whole groups of people. And so we just have to be working a long time, huh?
Well, what I have found in my work is that how I conduct myself, how I speak, what I do, my attitude about my professional demeanor has made the difference.
Yeah,
and
I believe
that is something that when I'm speaking before corporate groups or even in churches, I do programs in churches, and it doesn't make any difference about their denomination. But what it's doing, they look at me and they say, my goodness, you're normal. You know, I guess if I were in a position to do some real strange stuff, they go, whoops, this is it, we're out of here. This is not what we expect, because also Hollywood has conveyed a certain image over the years. There's an old movie I remember with Edward G. Robinson. Oh, I just love it. It's just such a good movie, but I think it was made either in the 30s or the 40s. Just extremely good, about a man who's a clairvoyant. It's got an aura of mystery to it. I don't even recall its name. But there is a negative connotation that goes with it. There is, and so much of that in the past, that's what was done. But when people understand that the most important person in their life is themselves, you know, they really want to do something with their lives. And the intuitive tool is meant to help you do that. It's a built-in mechanism. And it's something that can come about in the most interesting ways with myself. I started with dreams.
With dreams, yeah.
With dreams. And it wasn't something particularly positive. It was, in fact, in my young mind, very negative.
Yeah.
And I said, where do I go to get help?
Yeah, because that's because of that programming that we have, what we lost as children. Now another pioneer that looks normal, you might be familiar with her, Shirley Thibault. In Tacoma, and then you know, Elizabeth Montgomery, the lady that wrote some of the books. She used to write books at Shirley's home, and they look pretty normal too. Yeah. So.
Well, that is what I think is most important today, because and there's a different language today. I have quite a bit of spiritualist background, and that's where I went through a lot of my growth and expansion in classes, and when I was living in California many years ago. And it is something that the terminology that for example, the spiritualists would use, for most people is not comfortable today. They really like to use words that feel good. Language is very important.
Exactly.
How do you use your language so that it is going to make a person understand what you're saying, number one, and number two, make them feel comfortable with that experience.
Now on the news here recently, they use go with the flow, positive energy, so the vocabulary of the mainstream people is changing, which I agree.
Oh yes, a lot of it is.
Yeah.
A lot of it's changing, and so much of it is changing because of different programs. But I get a big kick out of people that, for example, like myself, who are motivational speakers, and they will go out and they're doing all of these different aspects of how you can make your life better, how you can be more prosperous, how you can enjoy success on a higher level. And they incorporate the intuitive aspect into it, which is good because it's very important. But I think of the grandfather of them all, long before Tony Robbins came along or any of these others, was Napoleon Hill. And this man, he wrote his book, The Laws of Success, in the early 1900s.
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, I think you're familiar with Think and Grow Rich. That's a fairly well-known book, and it's still a bestseller. Well, he did The Law of Success first, and it's a thick book. It's like 3.5 inches thick, and it's almost like a Bible to me, even though it was written at the turn of the century. This over 20 years done research on what made success. In fact, Dale Carnegie had supported him. He didn't pay him anything, but he supported his concept because he said, by the time you're through with this, it's really going to be something. Well, Napoleon Hill talked about intuition and how strong it was in the lives of the successful people that are interviewed. Now, in his era, the big people were Henry Ford, Thomas Edison. So he interviewed them one-on-one. And along with many other very, very famous people of big industries and other various occupations. And he related a story about a man who gave answers to people all over the world. Now remember, this is at the turn of the century.
The last century.
The last century, that's right, the last century. And this was a gentleman who would get letters. I mean, telephones were available, but not like what we've got today. So people typically would write him and would say, I have this problem, and they might work for a chemical company or something else. And so what happened is that he would take the material, take one letter at a time, go into this room that he had built that was soundproofed. In front of him he had a pillar that had a light switch on it, so he could turn the light off. On his desk, all he had was a pen and a pad of paper. He'd turn the light off, and he'd go into quiet time, and then he'd write out the answers. Now, I would call that automatic writing today.
Yes, it is.
Okay? That's what I would call it.
I would too.
But Napoleon Hill didn't call it that, but that's what I would call it. So he went into an altered state where he became the facilitator, the channel of information would write it out. Well, he covered all kinds of subject matter, and that's how he made his living. Now, I'd never heard of him. He wasn't world-renowned. He wasn't someone, but corporate people, people that were dealing with equipment problems, all kinds of stuff, would call him, and then he would give them the information, and he had no memory of how he got the information.
That I would say automatic writing.
Absolutely. So here this is in Napoleon Hill's book. And he said, this is something you learn to cultivate. This is something you learn to pay attention to. And it works in so many different ways. And there was not truly an outstandingly successful person that had not taken the time to cultivate it. Do you know what Thomas Edison used to do to get ideas? He would position himself in a chair, and he'd take a spoon, and he'd put something down on the floor. And when he'd start to go to sleep, because he was a great one for cat naps, then if he started to doze and his muscles, your muscles will relax, bingo, it would, the spoon would hit a dish, wake him up. Well, he was in that in-between state with dreaming. And if he had a problem and he put the problem in his mind before he sat down or laid down to take a nap and had that spoon in his hand, invariably the answer would be there for him.
In other words, he was a praying mantis. They do that.
But it's, it's one of these things that when you hear about it relative to famous people, then you go, well, maybe these clairvoyant experiences I'm having make a difference. And one of the things that I encourage people to understand is that when you're developing your intuitive skills, and someone will say, oh, how do I do this?
Yeah.
I believe in it, but how do I do it? Well, there's as many ways of developing the skills as there are people. And I think with development, the very first step is paying attention.
It is, yeah.
Absolutely paying attention, because if you recognize, first of all, that there's intuitive capacity in everyone in some form or another, and then you say to yourself, okay, I'm willing to learn. I don't know how it'll demonstrate through me, but I'm willing to learn. Then it makes all the difference in the world.
In the world, yeah. Now, sometimes I run into people that wake up, so to speak, and then they immediately want to make a profession out of that. So now we go to the prosperity part of the whole thing. It's not all that easy. You know?
Oh, no, no.
It's a hard path that some of us have
That's right.
chosen
And
for us.
one of the
ourselves.
biggest things that I think affects many people in the work, and I've had extensive conversations with many very talented individuals, there has been the attitude of, well, if you have this gift, you shouldn't charge money for it.
Exactly.
And this is a gift of God. And so what I will say to people is, okay, if you're talented at plumbing, do you do everybody's plumbing for free?
For free.
Oh, well, no, I don't do
yeah.
that. Are you going to go in and work on a computer for free? Oh, no, that's my job. I have to be paid for it. Well, if someone has developed the skills of intuition, clairvoyance, clairaudience, as I have, and you've worked with for many years, I use it as a tool in a counseling format to help people help themselves.
Yeah.
That's what my job is.
Exactly.
So whether I do it by phone or whether I do it in one-on-one with people, it doesn't make any difference. It is a discipline that I've acquired that enables me to perhaps present options to people that they never even knew were available to them.
That's right.
And sometimes perhaps warning them of different conditions or situations. And that's so important. Forewarned is forearmed, the old saying.
Yeah, because sometimes people don't realize how valuable some of this information is. Like myself, lots of times, even though when I tape on my sessions, I will say legally I cannot give you medical advice, but ever once in a while we run into something that is in the making, and this information to have the probability so you can nip it in the bud, so to speak, before it gets there. You know? And it's very valuable.
I think it's wonderful. There was a healer, her name was Olga Worrell, and she's since passed away, but this woman was so talented, was in labs, doing all kinds of things, and they tested her. She could transmute energy. She and her husband Ambrose had been involved with the work for so many years. He passed on many years before she did. But this was a very, very talented lady that was very open to scientific inquiry and research and study. And she provided a tremendous service to people, tremendous service. People from all over the world would go to see her and her husband. I think of a fellow by the name of Arrigo, which, by the way, and he's been gone for a number of years. I think he died in the 1960s.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with him either.
Well, when I was a kid, I remember reading his story, and they had it in the Reader's Digest. And it was about this man, Arrigo. He was called the surgeon with a rusty knife, and he was the most phenomenal individual with healing. It took me, I did not find that book until about 8 years ago.
Wow.
So it was a long time, and the documentation medically, the camera work, there's so much value. So what brought that to my mind was your statement about seeing things, about medical health problems. And that has happened to me frequently.
Yeah.
And it is really interesting when you get information. And lots of times, I don't know about you, but I won't know what it means. For example, I had a client, and she'd ask me something about her eyes. And I said, well, I see what looks like an eyelash in the eye, and I feel like I want to take a tweezer and I want to pull it out. Well, this woman evolved over a period of 3 months after I saw her into a great deal of pain. And she had gone to an eye doctor. I had encouraged her to do that. And I said, I don't know what this is, but if you can get that hair out, then it'll be just fine.
Yeah.
Well, she called me about 4 months later. And her story was a fascinating one. She had been in a particular state, and she moved to Oregon. While she was in Oregon, this eye had progressively gotten worse. And so the pain was so bad she couldn't even rest. They'd check her eye, they couldn't see anything, nothing. I mean, these were very thorough people. But this new doctor that she went in to see, he examined her eye and he said, you know, you've got looks like an eyelash in your eye. And he took the tweezers and he started pulling on that eyelash. And he kept pulling, and he kept pulling, and he kept pulling, and he kept pulling. It was a strand of her own hair.
Oh, my.
That somehow, he doesn't know how, somehow got into her eye and had coiled and worked itself into the eye. But he thought it was an eyelash.
An eyelash, yeah. Yeah, see, sometimes we don't perceive it exactly the way it is.
Yeah, but you see something and you know that it needs to be taken care of. And she was, you know, that's what came out, was a piece of hair.
We're real fortunate in this area. There's several physicians that if I tell a person, you know, tell them I sent you, and at least that gives them, because medically, I mean, everything's so expensive. Sometimes you can narrow it down to one little area and build on that.
Well, I believe that the reason that the intuition factor works is that we are sending and receiving machines all the time. So when someone is sitting with me, having a session, again, whether it's by phone or in person, their own mindset is sending out the information. And that's why sessions so frequently are called readings when people go to see psychics. Because that's what you're doing. You're reading information.
You act upon the person's themselves.
Right, you are reading the information. Either you sense it emotionally, physically, mentally, you get pictures, something happens. But as I said at the beginning of the program, you have to learn the language of your mind. You have to learn what is working for you. And for me, it often is a visual image, and then there will be sounds I hear, there will be things that I will see, and it just flows along.
In the term I see, people say, what do you see for me? Well, I don't see anything. It's more of a knowing. I don't see a story in front of my face. So that's one of those terms.
Right. And not only that, but everybody does things differently. I've met people that have used sand or have used, some people will use tarot cards to focus, and I'll tell people items are just a focal point. So let's say someone is going through a real bad phase in their life, and they say, I'm broke all the time, I've got this business, should I stay in the business, etc., what should I do? Well, if someone comes to me for a session and we're talking about whatever their particular concerns are, I find that I get like a mental movie, and I will get information about what's going on with them and how they can take certain steps to improve their lives, or what they can do to make a better happening financially, to be more successful in their life.
It's just like a roadmap sometimes, or it's a document that they overlooked or something like that. Now, excuse me, the friends call me and they say, well, Lilian, how do I visualize prosperity? Because it doesn't stop at the visualizing. I mean, it's hard work either you go. What would you tell the friends?
Well, I think what they're referring to with visualization is very, very useful as a tool. That sometimes it's been called treasure mapping or whatever you want. The thing is that to attract into your life what you really desire, first you have to be able to identify it.
Exactly.
Identify it in some way, shape, or form. And often it's very good if you use pictures that you cut out of magazines. You do something like this, have a dream journal or a desire journal, I should say, where you put down exactly what it is that's most meaningful to you. The next thing is that when you do that, you really have to ask yourself if that's what you really want. Because subconsciously we usually undermine ourselves. I can plead guilty to that one, high and loud.
Yeah, I got a story to share with you. When the time came that I needed an RV, and I would, like the Amway type thing, I put it on the refrigerator, all snazzy. That didn't work for me. And then I realized that the subconscious works on the level of a 4 or 5-year-old. Then I changed it, and it was truck, house, smack. And that's how I materialized my RV. I was just too complicated.
Well, sometimes everybody's different. Everybody's different. But a lot of people say, "Oh, I want to be a multimillionaire."
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, they seem to think that being a multimillionaire is going to make their, their life just wonderful and perfect, and it's going to be just this happy. They're never going to have another care in the world.
Yeah.
Well, subconsciously, if they don't
Yeah.
feel, number one, that they're worthy,
Yeah.
and number two, that they're willing to do what it takes,
Yeah.
number three, it will not happen.
That's right.
Now, that's not good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
But I think of a young man that I dated many, many years ago, and on I think it was our second date, he said to me, "I'm a failure in life." I said, "Huh?"
Yeah.
And he said, "I'm a failure." I said, "Would you please explain this to me? This is a very successful person." I said, "Why are you a failure?" He said, "Well, I didn't make my first million by the time I was 30. He had just turned 30, a couple of weeks before.
Yeah.
I could tell that this wasn't going to go anywhere because this guy already had, and not that I expected someone to be a multimillionaire, but it was his attitude.
Yeah.
It was like that was his whole focus. Success is something that is not predicated on money.
Exactly.
Success can be stated through a very good financial positioning. If you look at someone who is economically destitute, that's not success.
No.
Okay? And if they're hungry, if they've got health problems, and they're sleeping on the streets, that is not a happy place to be in, and most of them don't want to be there.
Right.
Okay? So what one would say is, all right, Donna, you're talking about prosperity and success. Maybe my life isn't working right now, so what do I do? Where do I go? How do I get to where I want to be? And how can I do it in the most effective way possible? Well, again, if you're going to use intuition as part of it, intuition by itself, as far as I'm concerned, isn't worth a plug nickel.
Exactly.
Unless you can use it in a
Use it.
practical way. So let's take an example of someone that I know, and it's a young man, and he's extremely talented with computers, brilliant. And he starts off, and he's going to go into business, and he's going to do all kinds of things, and he's all excited, and he's even gotten the college education. He's done everything by the book, and he goes into business, and guess what he finds out? He finds out he doesn't have good people skills.
Ah, yeah. Yes. The other
In
one,
business. Now the business is failing. Why? Because he's not a good manager. He's not of that personality type that should be overseeing other people. His mindset was more in the computer area. So he went through a lot of heartache and a lot of tragedy and a lot of misery, ended up losing his business. And he didn't follow intuitively. He knew he needed to get out of it. He'd go into work, he hated it, he couldn't stand it, and he just felt like such a failure. Well, the same person I had a talk with, we went, I'll never forget, we were visiting, and we were out in the marina up near Bellevue. And we were out walking on the water, and we were talking, and he was telling me about some of the stuff he was doing with computers, and I said, you'd make a wonderful speaker. And there are people with the amount of knowledge that you have that would just benefit from your skills and your talents. And he said, I don't know that I could ever do that.
Yeah, but a lot of people subconsciously, here's that word again, have a fear of success.
Yes.
And that's just sort of,
That's
I
true.
don't know if they don't want to be bigger than the father or smarter than the other parent, but that's a real problem,
Again, it's the way we look at
Look at
success. Do you know what happened with this young man?
Oh.
He is now doing speaking. He's traveling all over the United States, and he's making all kinds of money. And the people skills that are needed in that perspective, because he's standing up being the educator, being the trainer, that perspective is working wonderfully for him.
Wonderful.
Because he doesn't have to tell other people what to do. He's not, quote unquote, the boss.
Yeah.
He is the teacher.
Yeah.
And so it's just opened up a whole new world. So what was a failure was turned into success by a different attitude and a different positioning. And I think it had to do a great deal with our conversation as we were walking on the beach, discussing certain things, sharing with him what I knew, and lo and behold, he's doing it, and he's just doing wonderfully. I talk with people so frequently who are very, very unhappy with their work. And they'll say, but I've got to make a living, I've got to make a living. But they don't do what's in their heart.
Yeah.
And they get so bogged down with their everyday humdrum chores and, gee, I've got to go into the office at 8 o'clock and I've got to get this done, and, oh, I hate my boss, or I hate this, or I hate that. And it's very interesting how, from an intuitive perspective, I can often give them different pictures to look at.
Exactly, yeah.
And so they can take where they are and make that into something that becomes positive. Whether or not it is the job itself, it's where they are and what they can do with it. And do they really want to go where they say they want to go?
Yeah, and I found that sometimes people set their goals too high, and then they expect to get from here to here overnight, and it doesn't work like that. It's almost like when you send in a resume, you go by paragraph. You say, for instance, I'm applying for this job because I intend to be your vice president in 1 year. And the way I'm going to go about this is A, you know, 1, 2, and you state your purpose. And then in summary, you can say, thank you for your time. I will see you when I am the vice president. And so the person that reads that, they either think you're totally nuts, or you're really so qualified that you know, but you have to explain the steps in between. You cannot go from here to here. That would be as ridiculous as that resume. You know.
Well, we grow.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I delight in being the older individual is that so many things I've been able to experience that allow me to really enjoy my work, because for a lot of years, I did not really want to be well known as someone in this area, because there was just such a malignment, such a negative connotation to the psychic area. And over 22 years ago, when I went into it full-time professionally, what motivated me to do that was my husband. We were just dating at the time, and I had invited him over, and I had just come in from doing a psychic fair, which I had met with 62 people in 8 hours.
Yeah, I know that.
So,
I know that feeling.
I had done that, and I just loved it. I loved every bit of it. So I was an executive secretary at the time, and he asked me a very straightforward question. He asked me the question, Donna, if you could do whatever you wanted to do, what would you like to do? Right out of my mouth, I said, my psychic work. He said, why don't you?
Yeah.
And I looked at him like he was nuts, and I said, now why would I be doing that? I don't know anybody that's doing psychic work that isn't miserable. They're divorced, they're broke, their lifestyle is the pits, and they're screwballs. And he said, you don't have to be that way.
There you go.
And I went, good point. And so what I did at that time, because I was a single mom, I went and saved enough money where I could, for 1 month, test this. And in 1 month, I doubled my income.
Yeah.
Now, that was a very significant lesson for me so many years ago, because what it showed me is that when you really do what's in your heart, when you do what's in your heart, that which you do well, people will have a need of your service.
Yeah, when Kanashiba-san was here, we talked about the fact that it was really hard for us to be licensed because it didn't have a category.
But see, intuition, I'll have to tell you, that bothers me a bit when I heard people talk. I've been listening to comments about that for quite a few years. And the union for psychics and this, that, or the other. And I just don't see how you could do that. I really don't. So that is why for so many, many years, it has been through either church ordinations or through the counseling factor. And I'm a minister counselor, and that has been my licensing, and you have a business license.
Yeah, same here.
So when you do this, when you are a professional, you conduct yourself accordingly.
Yeah.
And so you have a business license. You're not trying, you shouldn't be anyway. I know that a lot of people do, but you shouldn't try to be in any way, shape, or form be shady or
Yeah.
try to say you're able to do something when you're not.
When you're not, yeah. But it just wasn't a category at that time. You know, way back when I tried to get a license, they said, well, you know, what is it? And then we did settle for intuitive consultant or something like that.
Yeah, and the
So
terminology changes.
changes, yeah.
During the years.
Yeah.
The word psychic, I think, is a fabulous word, but again, it's been so maligned over the years that people frequently in media, if they hear psychic, they go, oh, tell them to take their antennae and go home.
Go home.
But, you know, it's not that
Yeah.
way at all. But I do think that your intuitive skills, whether someone works as we do as professionals, or if they just want to do it for themselves, I think it's so important that they be at ease with this intuitive factor so that it works with them. Now, someone will say, well, how could it demonstrate? Well, I think of a businessman who had been in a tremendously important conference, and there was this contract that was pending.
Yeah.
And he had quite a long drive home after the meeting, and nothing had really been settled. And the whole time he was driving home, he said, in the pit of my stomach, there's a certain sensation that he gets when he knows something's going to work.
Exactly.
And he said, I get this feeling, and he learned it at a young age. So he said, okay, I'm just not going to do business as usual. So when he got home, he picked up the phone and called a specific individual in the meeting and said, you know, I think I forgot to give you some information. Got into a conversation. He had the contract before he got off the phone.
That's it, yeah.
And if he hadn't followed that sense within him, totally illogical, he wouldn't have closed the deal.
Yeah.
Good police officers develop their intuitive side. They develop it to such a degree that a good police officer, and I know this because I worked for a police department many years ago, a good police officer will be able to walk up to someone and they just know. They just know. They've learned how to develop their intuitive processes.
They call it a gut feeling.
Men usually use that term more than the women do.
Yeah, and so to come to you know, to get from a dream to where we are, many years, a lot of experience.
Oh, and a lot of practice.
A lot of practice.
A lot of practice, over and over and over again. What I tell people, because when they watch me work, when they see me interacting with audiences, and when I do my broadcasts, what they'll say is, I don't understand. You don't ask any questions. You just start. You just boom, boom, boom. You're giving an information. One of the talk show hosts in San Francisco that I broadcast with said, you remind me of a ticker tape machine.
Oh,
Because
wow.
you go so fast. Well, what happens is I've disciplined my mind.
Yeah.
And it's a shifting of actual concentration, and it's like I'm out of the picture, and then I start getting this information, and I just relate it. One of the things that my mentor that I had, fortunately, for a year and a half when I was first starting in this work, told me, she said, never judge anything that you get in information.
Yeah.
Just give it as you get it, because you don't know what that other person is going to need.
Yeah, it's not right for us to decipher anything.
That's right. So you give the information, but I had to learn how to interpret it because of the way it was coming to me. And you must learn how your mind language works, because everybody's mind language is very individual to them.
Exactly.
And that's where reading books, you know, talking to people like ourselves, interacting with individuals, and not being afraid to ask questions. Say, gee whiz, how do you do this? Or why do you use the cards? What is it? Well, any of the tools are just a focal point. Any person that's really talented that I've ever met, they say, oh, you know, cards don't mean anything. You can burn the cards up and throw them away. But I've had, you know, met people that were sand readers, people that have read clouds. I've met people that have done cards, and there's, you know, use crystals. All it is a focusing point so that there can be that mind shift. And people do it many times when they're dreaming and they don't realize it, and then they'll awaken from dreams and they'll say, oh, I had this profound experience. I was talking with Aunt Lucille back in Chicago, and this went on, and they're actually having an experience.
An experience, yeah. And so I want to remind the friends again that they are, people like Donna and myself out there. When you pick your consultant or your psychic, you should handle it exactly like you would any healthcare provider. You know, check references, word of mouth. we cannot make decisions for you. We just
Correct.
give you a roadmap because you have to make
Right.
your own decisions. We don't take responsibility, for your life.
No,
like some
I
people
say a psychic is an information resource.
That's what it is.
An information resource.
Yeah.
Someone that takes the language of the mind and translates it into usable information.
And so when we don't give you the lotto numbers, if we could, if we would do that, we would do that ourselves.
My husband's been after me for 22 years to do
Yeah. So
and that's not my thing. It isn't my thing at all. It
Yeah.
just isn't.
Yeah, so when we talk about prosperity and success, the lotto numbers are not really in that category. And well, gee, we've almost come to the end of our visit
Oh,
again.
you're kidding.
It goes so fast. Is anybody in Anchorage in specific you want to say hi to?
Oh, well, I'll just
as
say
a
hello
whole?
to everybody.
Everybody.
In Anchorage especially, because it's like my second home.
Yeah.
I love it.
And here's to the rest of the world. Thank you for coming, Donna. You
It's
were so
been
wonderful
delightful.
guest. And we'll see you next week. Yes, great show. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah.